Welcome back to Sunday Live, and tonight we're talking our liberation heritage and about the people who we might not necessarily have known or heard of at the heart of these events that shaped South Africa's modern history. And of course, taking this conversation further with me is Mandy and Nhlanhla. But before we get into that conversation, I would like to also encourage you to call in on 011-714-8080 and share in your views about perhaps whether you feel that our history does not tell the full story about the people that were also present during the struggle, during the movement to our liberation, of course, and where we are today, 20 years later on within our democracy. So please call me on 011-714-8080. Mandy, I'd like to talk more about the African Oral History Archive. How did that come into being?
The African Oral History Archive is an initiative funded by the Ichikowitz Family Foundation, and its funder, Ivor Ichikowitz, has an absolute passion for our history because his child came to him one day, an educated 16-year-old, and said, "Dad, what was apartheid?" And it struck Ivor that the very real stories were getting lost, that it's one thing to learn about our past in a history book, but it's another thing to experience it firsthand. So he went off and hired a group of us filmmakers to start collecting, and to date we've collected about, as I said earlier, about 150 interviews, and it's a range of people across Africa. And I think the point that the archive makes is that South Africa was not a modern miracle. People made the history. And so our challenge and our exciting privilege indeed is to gather those stories and turn them into little narratives that then we can share with our country.
Yeah. And speaking of those stories, let's talk about Plot for Peace. Tell me more about that film.
Well, Mandy dragged me actually.
Kicking and screaming.
The funny part is that I'm always busy, and she said, "No, this will take only 3 months."
I thought you said 3 minutes.
It will only take you 3 months. Don't worry, it's quick. But I ended up working on this story for almost 2 years, because the story became so challenging as well.
Yeah.
I also thought it's an easy story. I can do that with my eyes closed. But the character, Janive, is a very complex character, for the first time, because my challenge as an archive researcher as well is to unearth or source material that you don't normally see, because one of the mistakes that we do as documentary filmmakers is, for instance, we are talking about, you always go to people that we always see every time on TV. So that's why most of our documentaries end up looking the same, And somebody who's not keen on watching documentaries gets turned off just because, I've seen this before, So it's a challenge for me, to try and get something new, something that I didn't know, when you see it in the cinemas or on TV. Where did you get that, when people come and see it?
All right, let's just hold it there and take our callers. We have a call in the line. Hi, Ms. Farosh. Welcome to Sunday Live.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
I just want to add a little bit onto our history. It's important that we've mentioned people that has never been mentioned, that's been on the island, and you just do not hear about these people. For instance, John Marinus Ferris, never heard of him, with Alexander, with Dennis Brutus, and that's for me, with Mr. Goldberg. I was then 9, I'm now 67.
Wow.
And I'm trying to get hold of Mr. Dennis Brutus. I said to my son, we must do it just for our family. And that's what I'm going to do.
Absolutely.
To tell our people, to tell my grandchildren one day about how the police come into our home.
Yeah.
And just grab my nephew, and he's standing under the shower. So it's not the whole truth and the truth.
I'm very glad that this episode has inspired you to actually do more research
Yes,
and
I am.
find those names and those people that you would like to know their story more about. Thank you so much for calling us, Ms. Farosh. We have another caller, Anne. Welcome to Sunday Live. Anne?
Yeah, Njani.
Ke gona o kae?
Yeah, Brian ukhuluma. Nami ngiyabonga ukuthi nikhulume ngalolu suku le-Heritage Day ngoba libalulekile uma umuntu nje usuku lakho kumele ulazi.
All right, thank you so much, Brian, for Horfonela. Mandy, it's so important, actually. It's really humbling to hear that there's so many people who feel that even perhaps close relatives have played a role within the liberation of our country, or even in their own history as a family. But what are some of the most interesting stories that you've come across while you're unearthing these stories?
All of it is interesting, and all of it deserves to be told. And I think we must get careful about thinking that just because we are documentary filmmakers, we control that space of storytelling. So your previous caller who called in could probably literally take her phone, a tape recorder, and record that story, and there's a space for that. I mean, in our long-term vision of the African Oral History Archive, that's what we need to do. We need to also be able to, for people to upload their stories, because there are so many, and there are so many emotional stories that need to still come out. So some of those that we packaged for Heritage Month into our Rainbow Maker tribute series really pay tribute to different parts of that struggle. For example, we featured Shaka Sisulu and his family who spent their life in exile. Well, a greater part of their life in Israel, in exile. So Tribute to Frontline States says thank you, quite simply, to our bordering neighbors, to the various leaders that housed many of our liberation leaders. Plot for Peace is a very curious story because we didn't think we would uncover the story, but through the archives that we were digging through, we found this very curious bit of footage where a former apartheid soldier had been given an award, and this mysterious businessman called Monsieur Jacques was mentioned. So we were wondering, what is a Frenchman doing involved in facilitating regional peace?
Let's hold it right there because I want to hear more about it and actually when it's playing, right? I know you have some good news for us. So after the break, we'll continue up with our discussion and wrap it up and also talk more about Plot for Peace and where you can catch it. Stay tuned.